The Duke of Ashford did not merely deny his daughter. Before Parliament, he ordered 8-year-old Clara's surname cut from the family register while the child stood close enough to hear every stroke of the clerk's pen. Duchess Eleanor reached for her, but a guard stepped between them. "Your daughter was born of adultery," the Duke said. "My nephew will inherit in her place." The words came from the man who had once carried Clara through Ashford Hall because she had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Now Julian would not even look at her. Clara's small face had gone white. "Mama," she whispered, "where will they take me?" Eleanor's heart seemed to tear along a line no one else could see. She forced herself not to struggle. Any disorder in the chamber would be used as proof that she was unstable and unfit to keep her child. "No one will take you anywhere without hearing the truth," she said. Across the parliamentary table, Lady Beatrice Ashford rested one jewelled hand on the shoulder of her 12-year-old son, Edmund. Julian's widowed sister had dressed the boy in the family colours, as though his succession had already been settled. The clerk dipped his pen again. Eleanor placed a narrow strip of ivory silk on the table. It was Clara's christening ribbon, preserved in a cedar box since infancy. Sewn into its hem was the number Eleanor's mother had assigned to every birth she attended as a midwife's record keeper. Eleanor had been 17 when she began assisting her mother. She had learned to record the hour of birth, the position of the child, the colour of the identification thread, and every person permitted inside the room. A noble title could be purchased through marriage. A birth could not. "This ribbon was tied around Clara's wrist before she was washed," Eleanor said. "The number should correspond to my mother's private register. Allow me to retrieve that register, and I will prove her identity." End. Julian's expression hardened. "The register disappeared 8 years ago. It was removed from the birthing room by your mother. My mother was found unconscious before she could remove anything." A murmur travelled through the benches. Julian's gaze flickered toward Beatrice, but his sister lowered her eyes and tightened her grip on Edmund's shoulder. Lord Harrow, the chairman of the inquiry, lifted the ribbon with a pair of silver tongs. "The stitching appears disturbed." Eleanor leaned forward. 3 blue stitches formed the number 74. But beneath the final digit, a loose thread showed where another number had once been sewn. Her breath caught. "That is not the number my mother gave Clara." Julian finally looked at the ribbon. Eleanor watched recognition cross his face. He remembered the original number. She had heard him repeat it on the night of Clara's birth while he stood beside the cradle, too overwhelmed to release her tiny hand. 71. For one suspended moment, he could have stopped the hearing. He could have ordered the ribbon examined. He could have asked why its stitches had been altered. He could have delayed judgment until the missing register was found. Instead, he picked up the declaration. "Julian," Eleanor said quietly. His hand paused over the page. "Not your Grace, not Ashford." She spoke his name as she had on the night Clara was born, when he had promised that no one would ever make their daughter feel unwanted. "If you sign that paper after seeing this ribbon, you are not being deceived," Eleanor said. "You are choosing not to know." Pain tightened his mouth, but pride overcame it. He signed. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than the voices rising around them. Clara flinched. The declaration stripped her of the Ashford name, removed her from the succession, and transferred temporary custody to a church institution until Eleanor's alleged adultery could be examined. Edmund would be recognized as Julian's presumptive heir. Beatrice exhaled slowly. Then, the doors at the rear of the chamber opened. An elderly woman entered between 2 royal guards. She wore the dark wool uniform of the Queen's former household, and she carried a small iron box against her chest. Every whisper died. Eleanor recognized her at once. Mrs. Whitcomb, the royal midwife. She had attended Clara's birth beside Eleanor's mother and disappeared before sunrise. For 8 years, Eleanor had been told that the woman had died during her journey back to London. Mrs. Whitcomb walked to the parliamentary table and set down the box. 3 seals held it closed, one belonging to the crown, one to Eleanor's late mother, and one bearing the Ashford crest. Julian rose. "You were reported dead. I was intended to be." Beatrice moved toward her son, but a royal guard blocked her path. Mrs. Whitcomb looked at the altered ribbon, then at Julian's fresh signature. "You have repeated your father's sin," she said. "Only this time, a child heard you do it." Julian's face drained of colour. The midwife placed a small key into the lock. Before turning it, She lifted the box and held it before Beatrice. From inside came the faint rattle of a silver identification bracelet. "Before you crown your nephew," Mrs. Whitcomb said, "ask his mother why she buried the wrong baby." Beatrice's composure shattered. She seized Edmund's wrist and pulled him toward the doors. The boy stumbled, and his sleeve slid back. Around his wrist was a pale, perfectly circular scar, the mark left by an infant identification bracelet, worn far too long. Clara stared at it. Then she looked down at the identical scar around her own wrist. Mrs. Whitcomb turned the key. The first seal broke, and somewhere behind the parliamentary benches, a man shouted, "Do not open that box. The Duchess's daughter will die before its contents are read." Every head in the chamber turned. A thin man in a physician's black coat forced his way between the parliamentary benches. Dr. Silas Mercer had served the Ashford family for 14 years. His signature appeared on the statement declaring Julian incapable of fathering Clara. Now, his right hand was hidden inside his coat. "Keep him away from the child," Eleanor said. Mercer lunged toward Clara. Julian moved first. He caught the physician's wrist as a narrow glass vial slipped from Mercer's sleeve and shattered against the floor. A sharp almond scent rose from the spreading liquid. "Open the windows," Eleanor cried. "Do not touch it." A guard dragged Clara back while another forced Mercer to his knees. Julian stared at the broken glass. "You said the girl would die if the box were opened. I was trying to prevent panic. With poison in your hand." Mercer's mouth tightened. That vial contained medicine. Eleanor tore a strip from the linen beneath the parliamentary ledger and laid it over the liquid without touching it. The cloth darkened from white to rust brown. Her mother had taught her that certain poisonous preparations discolored linen treated with iron salts. Eleanor had helped prepare those cloths whenever a wealthy household feared that a newborn or mother was being slowly poisoned. "This was not medicine," she said. "He intended to silence someone." Mercer looked not at Clara, but at Mrs. Whitcomb. The royal midwife slipped the key from the box and closed her hand around it. Lord Harrow ordered the physician removed to a guarded chamber. As Mercer was pulled away, he twisted toward Julian. "You do not understand what she is protecting," he shouted. "If that box is opened publicly, Ashford will lose more than an heir." Julian's grip tightened around the back of his chair. Eleanor saw the fear beneath his anger. Protecting the dukedom had been the excuse for every decision he had made during the past 6 months, dismissing her servants, seizing her correspondence, and finally accepting Beatrice's claim that Clara was illegitimate. He had feared scandal more than he had feared injustice. Lord Harrow struck the table with his gavel. "This hearing is suspended until the substance is examined." "No," Eleanor said. The chairman frowned. "Duchess, my daughter has already heard her father call her illegitimate. She has watched him surrender her to strangers. If this chamber closes now, the truth will be buried before it reopens." Beatrice stepped forward. "You cannot demand that private family records be displayed before Parliament." Eleanor faced her. "You demanded a public judgment against my child. You do not get a private truth." A murmur of approval rose from the visitors' gallery. Julian looked at Eleanor as if he barely recognized her. For years, she had protected the Ashford name quietly. She had corrected household accounts before creditors saw them, settled disputes before tenants reached the magistrates, and endured Beatrice's insults to preserve peace inside the family. That woman was gone. Lord Harrow ordered 2 guards to remain beside the iron box. Clara was allowed to return to Eleanor, though the signed custody order still lay on the table. The girl pressed her face into her mother's side. "Am I still Clara Ashford?" Eleanor knelt before her. "You are Clara," she said. "No pen can take that from you." But Papa said, "Your father has made a terrible choice." Clara looked over Eleanor's shoulder. Julian stood only a few feet away. His face changed when he realized his daughter had heard every word, but he did not approach. The fresh declaration lay between them like a locked door. Mrs. Whitcomb was taken to an adjoining committee room under guard. Eleanor and Clara were permitted to accompany her, while Julian insisted on attending as Clara's legal father. Lord Harrow almost laughed. "You denied that position less than half an hour ago." Julian's jaw tightened. "Until the evidence is examined, I remain responsible for her safety." Eleanor rose. "You surrendered her safety the moment it became inconvenient." He absorbed the rebuke without answering. Inside the committee room, Mrs. Whitcomb sat beside the iron box. Up close, Eleanor saw a scar running from the midwife's temple to her jaw. "What happened after Clara's birth?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Whitcomb looked at the child before replying. "Your mother discovered that 2 infant bracelets had been exchanged. Before she could correct the record, someone struck her and locked me in the old laundry passage." "Who freed you?" "The late Duke." Julian went still. "My father found you. He found me and begged me to remain silent until he could protect both children. He sealed the true records in this box." The next morning, his carriage was found overturned beside the northern road. Julian's father had lived, but the injury had destroyed his memory. He died 3 years later, without speaking clearly again. Eleanor touched Clara's christening ribbon. "What were the original numbers?" Mrs. Whitcomb looked toward the guarded door. Clara was 71. The male infant was 74. "The baby recorded as dead," Eleanor said. The midwife nodded. Clara's fingers tightened around her hand. Julian stared at the altered stitches, and the certainty with which he had entered Parliament began to crumble. "If Edmund wears the scar from 71's bracelet," he said, "then whose child is he?" Mrs. Whitcomb did not answer. A sudden crash sounded in the corridor. One of the guards cried out. Smoke poured beneath the door as the smell of burning paper filled the room. Mrs. Whitcomb seized the iron box, but the handle had already begun to glow. "They are not trying to steal it," she said. "They are trying to melt the seals." Eleanor pulled Clara toward the far window. Julian tore down a heavy curtain to smother the flames, spreading across the threshold. As he did, a small brass plate fell from the bottom of the box. Eleanor picked it up with the edge of her sleeve. Beneath the plate was a hidden compartment containing a folded scrap of her mother's handwriting. Only one sentence remained legible. "The girl belongs to Eleanor, but the boy does not belong to Beatrice." Before Eleanor could read further, the door burst inward. Beatrice stood beyond the flames, with Edmund beside her and a pistol aimed directly at Mrs. Whitcomb. "Give me the box," she said, "or both children will learn what their mothers did that night." Edmund looked up at his mother. "What did you do?" Beatrice tightened her grip on the pistol. "Be quiet." The boy did not obey. He pulled away from her hand, staring at the iron box as smoke curled across the ceiling. "You said my father died before I was born. You said the records were lost." "They were." "No," Eleanor said. "They were altered." Beatrice swung the pistol toward her. Julian stepped between them. For the first time that day, he placed his own body in front of Eleanor and Clara. But Eleanor felt no gratitude. One act of courage could not erase the signature still lying in the parliamentary chamber. "Lower the weapon, Beatrice," he said. "You have already destroyed everything by allowing that woman inside." "I did not allow her inside. The Crown did." Beatrice gave a brittle laugh. "You still do not understand. If that box is opened, Edmund loses the Ashford name. Your daughter does not regain it. Both children will be ruined. Then tell us the truth before someone else does." "I protected this family when you were too weak to do it." A section of burning wood collapsed behind her. Edmund flinched, giving Mrs. Whitcomb the moment she needed. The midwife hurled the iron key toward Eleanor. Beatrice fired. The shot struck the wall beside Mrs. Whitcomb's head. Julian caught Beatrice's wrist before she could fire again, forcing the pistol upward as a second shot shattered the glass above them. 2 guards rushed through the smoke and seized her. Edmund stood motionless. His mother struggled against the guards, but her fury was fixed on Eleanor. "You think you have won because you found a ribbon and an old woman," she shouted. "Ask your mother why she never told you that a 3rd child was born that night." Silence descended on the room. Eleanor looked at Mrs. Whitcomb. "A 3rd child?" The midwife's face betrayed nothing, but her fingers trembled against the table. Beatrice saw it and smiled. "There, even your faithful witness is afraid of the truth." Julian ordered the guards to remove his sister. As she passed Edmund, the boy reached for her. "Mama?" Beatrice did not look at him. That wounded the child more deeply than any answer could have done. The fire had damaged the outer wrapping of the box, but the inner compartment remained intact. Lord Harrow moved the hearing to a smaller stone chamber, while officers searched Parliament for Beatrice's accomplice. Mercer had disappeared from the room where he was being held. One guard was found unconscious beside an open service door. The physician had left behind his coat and the forged statement concerning Julian's health. Eleanor examined the abandoned document beneath the nearest lamp. The paper carried the watermark of an Ashford estate mill, but that mill had closed 5 years before Clara's birth. Someone had written the false statement on an old sheet to make it appear older than it was. Julian stood across the table. How did I not see that? You did not want to see it. I believed Mercer because he treated me after the riding accident. You believed him because his lie allowed you to keep your title away from Clara without admitting that you preferred Edmund. Julian's face tightened. I never preferred him. You dressed him in your colours, seated him beside you, and signed away your daughter. I believed Clara was not mine. You remembered the number on her ribbon. He said nothing. Eleanor set the forged statement down. That was your moment to stop. Whatever is inside this box will expose Beatrice and Mercer. It will not erase what you chose after you saw those altered stitches. Julian lowered his eyes. Clara and Edmund sat together near the far wall, under a guard's protection. Edmund had removed the Ashford signet and placed it on the bench between them. Clara pushed it back toward him. I don't want it, she whispered. Neither do I. Eleanor saw Julian hear them. His shoulders seemed to bow beneath the quiet rejection. Mrs. Whitcomb placed the iron box on the stone table. The fire softened the wax, she said. If we break the seals now, Beatrice may claim the contents were replaced. Can they still be authenticated? Lord Harrow asked. Eleanor inspected the 3 seals. The crown's impression had partially melted. Her mother's seal remained visible, but the Ashford crest had lost its centre. Then she noticed a thin line of red wax beneath the black outer layer. My mother used 2 colours for protected birth records, Eleanor said. Black outside, red beneath. She pressed a different symbol into each layer so no one could open and reseal a box without disturbing the hidden mark. Mrs. Whitcomb looked at her with sudden relief. What symbol did she use? A swallow with 1 broken wing. Lord Harrow ordered the parliamentary clerk to record every movement. Eleanor took the key and inserted it into the lock. The black wax cracked. Beneath it, untouched by the fire, was the small red image of a swallow. The box had never been opened. Inside lay 3 infant bracelets, a leather birth register, 2 folded letters, and a tiny white cap stained dark brown along one edge. Clara's bracelet carried the number 71. The second bracelet bore 74. The third had no number at all, only the Ashford crest scratched into its silver clasp. Eleanor opened the register. The page for Clara's birth had been written in her mother's hand. It recorded the arrival of a healthy girl at 11 minutes past midnight. The next entry described a male child born 23 minutes later in another room. His mother's name had been deliberately blotted out. The final entry made Eleanor grip the table. A third infant, a premature boy, had been delivered shortly before dawn. Mother, Lady Beatrice Ashford. Condition, living. Mrs. Whitcomb touched the stained cap. Beatrice's child did not die, she said. He was taken from the house before sunrise. Edmund rose slowly. Then who am I? The midwife opened one of the letters, but before she could read it, Clara pointed toward the window. A man stood on the roof opposite the chamber. Dr. Mercer. He held a burning arrow aimed at the open box. Eleanor slammed the lid down just as he released the string. The arrow struck the table, scattering sparks across the register. Julian ran for the door, but Mrs. Whitcomb caught Eleanor's arm. Let him chase Mercer, she whispered. There is something the Duke must not hear until we know which child, his father ordered, exchanged. Julian disappeared into the corridor with 2 guards. Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded before turning to Mrs. Whitcomb. Which child did the late Duke order exchanged? The midwife glanced at Clara and Edmund. Neither of them should hear this yet. They have already heard enough lies, Eleanor said, but they need not hear another unproven accusation. Clara, take Edmund to the far end of the chamber. Stay where I can see you. The children obeyed. Edmund carried the discarded Ashford signet, but would not put it back on. Mrs. Whitcomb lifted the 3rd silver bracelet. Your mother found this fastened around Beatrice's son. It bore the Ashford crest, but no number, because the child was not delivered under her care. Then who brought him into the house? Dr. Mercer. The midwife unfolded the first letter. Much of its ink had faded, but the signature remained visible. Arthur Ashford, Julian's father. Eleanor read the surviving lines aloud. Beatrice's infant must be removed before my wife discovers what her daughter has done. The other boy will be presented as her lawful son. His mother has agreed to silence in exchange for protection. Eleanor looked toward Edmund. The other boy? Edmund was born outside Ashford Hall, Mrs. Whitcomb said. Mercer carried him into the birthing room after Beatrice's child was taken away. Who was his mother? That name is in the second letter. Eleanor reached for it, but the door opened. Julian returned alone, breathing hard. A cut crossed his temple. Mercer escaped across the western roof, he said. He had a carriage waiting beside the river. His eyes moved to the open letter. What did my father order? Mrs. Whitcomb hesitated. Eleanor folded the paper. We know only that Mercer brought an unregistered infant into the house. We do not yet know whether the letter is complete or whether the instructions were carried out. Julian studied her face. You are withholding something. I am refusing to accuse a child's mother before I possess the whole record. It is a restraint you might have shown, Clara. The words struck cleanly. Lord Harrow returned with the parliamentary clerk and 4 guards. He ordered the box transferred to the Crown's evidence vault before another attack could be made. Eleanor objected. Mercer has already corrupted guards, forged a physician's statement, and entered a secured building with poison. If the box is removed from our sight, we may never see the same contents again. The vault is protected by royal officers. So was Mrs. Whitcomb when someone tried to burn her alive. Lord Harrow frowned. What do you propose? Eleanor removed the christening ribbon from the table. My mother designed a custody method for disputed birth records. Every person who receives an item must tie a numbered thread around its container and record the number in 2 separate ledgers. One remains with the court. One remains with an independent witness. You have such thread. Not here. But I know where my mother kept it. Ashford House stood less than 20 minutes away by carriage. Julian shook his head. You cannot return there. If Mercer has accomplices among the servants, then your house is precisely where we must look. You would take Clara into danger? No. Clara will remain under Lord Harrow's protection with Edmund. I will retrieve the threads. I am coming with you. Eleanor met his eyes. You may accompany the parliamentary guards. You will not command me. For the first time since the hearing began, Julian bowed his head. Agreed. Ashford House appeared quiet when their carriage entered the courtyard, but the front doors stood open. The butler lay unconscious beside the staircase. Eleanor checked his breathing, then noticed a grey powder on his cuff. Sleeping draught, she said. Mercer came through here. Julian drew the pistol a guard had given him. What would he want? The original birth ledger. You said it disappeared. I said it was removed from the birthing room. Eleanor hurried toward the old nursery wing. For 8 years, she had hidden one fact even from Julian. On the night after her mother was attacked, Eleanor had found 3 torn pages beneath a loose floorboard. The writing had been ruined by water, but she had preserved them because one corner carried Clara's number. She had not known they were part of a larger record. The nursery door had been forced. Inside, the cedar cradle had been dragged from the wall. A man, in a servant's coat, stood over the open floorboard, holding the damaged pages above a candle. Stop! Eleanor cried. He dropped the papers into the flame. Julian rushed him, but the man overturned the candle and fled through the adjoining dressing room. Fire raced across the old rug. Eleanor seized a water pitcher and smothered the burning pages before the ink vanished completely. Julian returned moments later. He escaped through the garden. Eleanor carefully separated the wet fragments. One bore her mother's handwriting. Another contained a line of numbers that matched the bracelets. The third carried half of a name, Munn Mercer. Julian stared at it. Edmund. Eleanor examined the torn edge. No, there were letters before it. A soft groan came from behind the wardrobe. They moved it aside and found an elderly maid bound at the wrists. Eleanor recognized Mrs. Doyle, the nursery servant who had disappeared a week after Clara's birth. I hid when Mercer came, the woman whispered, but he knew where to look. Eleanor cut her bonds. Did you witness the births? Mrs. Doyle began to weep. I carried one of the boys out through the kitchen passage. The old Duke told me the child would be safer if no one knew he had survived. Which boy? The one Lady Beatrice delivered. Julian knelt beside her. Where was he taken? Mrs. Doyle looked at him with terror. To the village of Belmore, but Mercer found him years ago. Eleanor felt the room contract around her. What happened to him? He was brought back to Ashford House 3 months ago, under another name. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. A young man entered. wearing the uniform of Julian's newly appointed secretary. Thomas Reed, the man who had prepared the parliamentary accusation against Eleanor. Mrs. Doyle pointed at him. That is Beatrice's true son. Thomas locked the door behind him and raised a blood-stained knife. And now, he said, I intend to become the only Ashford heir left alive. Thomas moved before Julian could rise. He seized Mrs. Doyle by the hair and pressed the knife against her throat. Put down the pistol, Your Grace. Julian obeyed. The weapon struck the carpet. Eleanor remained beside the scorched pages, one hand hidden in the folds of her skirt. Her mother had kept a pair of embroidery scissors inside the old sewing basket beneath the cradle. Eleanor had found them while extinguishing the fire. Now the cold metal rested against her palm. Thomas dragged Mrs. Doyle toward the window. You prepared the accusation against me, Eleanor said. You altered Clara's ribbon. I corrected an inconvenience. You replaced 71 with 74 because 74 belonged to a boy officially recorded as dead. Thomas smiled. And your husband was eager to believe it. A duke who fears scandal will accept remarkably poor evidence when it protects his pride. Julian flinched, but he did not deny it. Why help Edmund inherit? Eleanor asked, if you intended to claim Ashford yourself. Edmund was a temporary solution. Once Clara was removed, I needed only prove that Beatrice's supposed son was an impostor. Then she would produce me the child stolen from her cradle, and Parliament would recognize the injustice done to us both. Mrs. Doyle struggled. Your mother sold you before you could walk. Thomas tightened his arm around her throat. She saved me. She ordered the exchange. For the first time, his confidence faltered. Eleanor saw it. Beatrice did not spend 12 years searching for you, she said. She raised Edmund as her son and placed him beside the Duke. She acknowledged you only when she needed someone willing to forge documents and threaten witnesses. Be silent. You are not her lost child. You are her weapon. Thomas pulled the knife back. Eleanor threw the embroidery scissors. They struck his wrist. Mrs. Doyle dropped to the floor as Julian drove Thomas against the window frame. The knife fell. Thomas smashed his elbow into Julian's injured temple and tore free. He snatched the scorched fragments from the floor, but Eleanor caught one piece before he reached the window. He climbed onto the sill. If Clara appears before Parliament tomorrow, he said, Mercer will give her the death denied her at birth. Then he jumped onto the conservatory roof and disappeared. Julian followed as far as the window, but Eleanor stopped him. He wants you to chase him again. Julian turned. She pointed to the open nursery door. The 2 parliamentary guards who had accompanied them were gone. A distant bell began ringing from the front of the house. Not the alarm bell, the carriage bell. Eleanor ran to the window, overlooking the courtyard. Their carriage was already racing through the gates, with both guards inside it. They were Thomas's men, Julian said, and now Parliament will believe they are returning with us. Mrs. Doyle gripped Eleanor's sleeve. They will reach the children first. Eleanor and Julian took 2 horses from the stable. The rain had begun before they reached Westminster, turning the road slick beneath the hooves. Julian rode slightly ahead until Eleanor called out, Do not enter through the main gate. Why? If Mercer placed false guards around the evidence vault, he will control the public entrance. Then how do we reach Clara? The records passage beneath the Eastern Committee rooms. My mother used it when she attended members' wives during long parliamentary sessions. Julian stared at her. You know Parliament's service passages. I spent years beside a woman whose work you considered beneath your notice. He had no answer. They left the horses behind a printer's shop and entered through a narrow coal door. Eleanor led him down a passage, barely wide enough for their shoulders. Halfway beneath the building, they heard a child crying. Clara. Eleanor rushed forward, but Julian caught her arm. A thread had been stretched across the corridor at ankle height. Above it hung a glass vessel filled with clear liquid. The trap would have shattered the vessel over anyone who ran beneath it. Eleanor examined the knot. Mercer ties his surgical thread with 3 turns. She cut it carefully and lowered the vessel. Julian stared at the liquid. More poison? No. Lamp oil. Someone intended to burn the passage after trapping them inside. They found Clara and Edmund locked in a document room. Lord Harrow lay unconscious nearby, breathing but bleeding from the back of his head. Clara threw herself into Eleanor's arms. A guard said you had been arrested. Edmund stood at the far wall, clutching the Ashford signet. He tried to take us to the river, the boy said. Lord Harrow stopped him. Julian knelt before Clara. "I should never have left you." She looked at him without speaking. The silence wounded him more than accusation. Eleanor examined Lord Harrow's injury. The blow was serious, but not immediately fatal. She instructed Edmund to press a folded cloth against the wound, while Julian opened the door leading to the main chamber. Voices thundered beyond it. Parliament had reconvened. At the centre of the chamber stood Lady Beatrice, apparently released from custody. Beside her was Dr. Mercer. On the table lay the sealed iron box. "The Duchess of Ashford has fled," Beatrice announced to the assembled members. "She abducted both children and attempted to destroy the only records capable of exposing her adultery." Mercer raised a folded statement. Before escaping, she confessed that Clara was fathered by another man. Julian reached for the door. Eleanor stopped him. "If you enter now, Beatrice will say, 'I forced you to defend me.' She has accused you of abducting our daughter. Your declaration says Clara is not your daughter." His face hardened with shame. Eleanor handed him the fragment she had saved from Thomas. The partial name was clearer now that the paper had dried. Edmund Mercer. Edmund. Julian stared at it. Edmund was not the name of the infant. It was the name of the father. Dr. Edmund Mercer, the physician's own father, who had served the late Duke and died 12 years ago. The boy called Edmund was not Beatrice's son. He was Mercer's younger brother. Before Eleanor could explain, the speaker ordered the guards to arrest her on sight. Julian opened the chamber door. "Then arrest me first," he said. Every face turned toward him. He walked to the parliamentary table, took up the declaration denying Clara, and tore it in half. "I signed a lie because it served my pride," he said. "The Duchess did not abduct the children. She saved them after my own officers betrayed us." Beatrice's composure broke. "You cannot withdraw a sworn declaration without surrendering your right to determine the Ashford succession." Julian looked at Clara, then placed his ducal signet on the table. "That right is precisely what I surrender." Mercer smiled. It was not the reaction Eleanor expected. The physician reached beneath the iron box and pressed a hidden catch. A ticking sound began inside. Eleanor understood at once. The box on the table was not the box Mrs. Whitcomb had opened. It was a replacement, and whatever Mercer had placed inside it would explode before Julian's confession could be entered into the record. "Clear the chamber," Eleanor shouted. Mercer stepped away from the box as panic swept through the benches. Julian reached for it. "Don't touch the lid," Eleanor warned. "The catch may be connected to the lock." The ticking quickened. Members pushed toward the doors, overturning chairs and trampling papers. Clara and Edmund remained frozen in the eastern doorway. Eleanor pointed to the stone fireplace behind the speaker's chair. "Julian, move the screen. Everyone else, get behind the columns." And he obeyed without question. Eleanor took off her heavy outer skirt and wrapped it around the iron box, keeping pressure away from the lid. Her mother had once shown her the timer used to release medicine into a sealed birthing room. The mechanism clicked at even intervals. This sound was different. Every fourth tick dragged slightly. "The spring is damaged," she said. "It may stop if the box remains level. Or it may explode in your hands," Julian said. "It will explode among hundreds if I leave it here." Together, they lifted the wrapped box and carried it toward the fireplace. Mercer edged toward the side door. Edmund saw him. "He is escaping." "Ah!" The physician ran. Julian began to follow, but Eleanor called him back. "Choose." He stopped. Mercer had vanished into the corridor. The man who could expose the entire scheme was escaping, but Clara stood only yards from a device that might kill her. Julian returned to Eleanor. They lowered the box into the empty stone hearth. Eleanor pulled the fireplace screen across it. The ticking ceased. For one breathless second, nothing happened. Then the box burst. The iron lid struck the screen with enough force to bend it outward. Flames climbed the chimney, and fragments of metal scattered across the stone floor. Julian threw himself over Eleanor. A sharp edge tore through his coat and cut his shoulder, but the columns shielded Clara and Edmund. No one else was seriously injured. Eleanor pushed herself upright. The table where Parliament's documents had rested was burning. "My declaration," Julian said. The signed denial of Clara had been destroyed, but so had his public withdrawal, and the fragment bearing Dr. Edmund Mercer's name. Beatrice stood behind a column, untouched. "That woman brought an explosive device into Parliament," she cried. "You all saw her carry it toward the Speaker. She prevented it from killing you," Julian said. "Can you prove the box was exchanged?" The guards searched the chamber. Mrs. Whitcomb had vanished. So had the original iron box. Only Mercer and Beatrice had been close enough to make the exchange, but neither had been holding it when the chamber reopened. Without the royal midwife or the authentic records, Eleanor possessed no evidence that Clara's bracelet had ever carried the number 71. Beatrice understood their position perfectly. She approached the burned table. "My brother has confessed that pride influenced his judgment. He has also surrendered his authority over the succession. Until the Crown decides whether he remains capable of governing his estate, the closest adult Ashford relative must assume temporary control." "You mean yourself," Eleanor said. "I mean the family must be protected. You gave Mercer access to Parliament. He was summoned as a medical witness. You arranged for Thomas to burn the nursery records." Beatrice's eyes sharpened at the name. "Who is Thomas?" Eleanor saw the smallest movement in her throat. Fear. Beatrice did not know her true son had revealed himself. That ignorance was the first advantage Eleanor had gained all day. Lord Harrow was carried into the chamber on a stretcher. He regained consciousness long enough to confirm that false guards had taken Clara and Edmund, but he had not seen Mercer attack him. The Speaker ordered Beatrice, Eleanor, and Julian confined to separate parliamentary rooms until royal investigators arrived. Beatrice objected. "I am the acting guardian of the Ashford heir." "No heir has been authenticated," the Speaker replied. "Both children will remain under Crown protection." Clara clung to Eleanor. "You cannot separate us again." The Speaker's expression softened, but the signed custody order had existed before it burned. Until the inquiry determined whether it remained enforceable, Clara could not be released to either parent. Eleanor knelt and placed the christening ribbon in her daughter's hand. "Keep this hidden. What if they take it? Then remember the number, 71, and remember that I will come for you." Clara wound the ribbon around her wrist. Julian stepped closer, but the child turned her face into Eleanor's shoulder. A guard led him away without allowing him to touch her. Eleanor's confinement room had no windows and only one guarded door. She measured time by the bells from the parliamentary clock. At the third quarter hour, a tray of tea arrived. The servant who brought it kept his face lowered. Eleanor recognized Thomas by the burn across his wrist. The guard closed the door behind him. Thomas set down the tray. "My mother does not yet know who I am. You called her your mother at Ashford House. She gave birth to me, that is all. Then why help her?" "I did not help Beatrice. I helped Mercer." Eleanor remained standing. "Dr. Silas Mercer?" "My uncle." The name on the fragment became clear. Dr. Edmund Mercer had fathered both Edmund and Silas, decades apart, through different women. The younger boy was therefore Silas's half-brother. What does Mercer want? To destroy the Ashford succession. Why? Thomas glanced toward the door. The late Duke had Dr. Edmund Mercer imprisoned after discovering his affair with Beatrice. He died in custody. Silas spent 12 years arranging his revenge. He exchanged the infants. He did more than that. He made certain every possible Ashford heir could be declared false. Eleanor thought of the third bracelet, without a number. "Where is Beatrice's child?" Thomas touched the scar on his wrist. "She believes I am that child. Mercer raised me to believe it too. But you doubt him now. I found the real birth record 3 months ago." He placed a charred scrap beside the untouched tea. It contained 2 complete lines in Eleanor's mother's handwriting. "Lady Beatrice Ashford delivered a male child at 4:27. Infant expired at 4:39. Eleanor looked up. "You were never her son." Thomas's face twisted. "No. Mercer selected me from an orphan house because I was the right age. He carved the bracelet scar into my wrist and sent me here with a story Beatrice desperately wanted to believe." "Then why threaten us?" "Because Mercer has Edmund. The boy you left under Crown protection is another orphan trained to answer to that name." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I saw Edmund taken to the eastern rooms." "You saw a boy in Edmund's coat." Thomas moved toward the door. Mercer switched them during the smoke. "The real Edmund is on a barge bound for France. At midnight, the vessel will leave the royal docks." The parliamentary clock began striking 11. Eleanor had 1 hour. She had no title she could safely invoke, no husband with authority over Ashford, and no proof that Thomas was telling the truth. Then she noticed the tea tray. Stamped into its silver edge was the mark used by the parliamentary kitchens. But the cups had come from Ashford House. Inside one cup, beneath the untouched tea, someone had scratched the number 74. Mrs. Whitcomb was alive, and she had left Eleanor a route out. Eleanor lifted the teacup toward the lamp. Beneath the number 74 was a second mark, a swallow with one broken wing, her mother's symbol. Mrs. Whitcomb had not merely touched the cup, she had chosen it as a message. Eleanor turned the saucer over. A narrow groove had been scratched around its rim, interrupted at 4 points. Her mother had used the same pattern when teaching young assistants to navigate large houses during emergencies. 4 turns, then a stairway. The final groove pointed east. Thomas watched her. What does it mean? That Mrs. Whitcomb passed through the parliamentary kitchens. She may already be dead. If Mercer had killed her, he would have displayed the body. He needs us to believe she escaped with the records. Eleanor wrapped the charred birth entry inside her sleeve. Where is the guard stationed? Directly outside. Does he know who you are? He believes I am a kitchen servant. Then spill the tea. Thomas frowned. Eleanor struck the tray from his hands. Porcelain shattered across the floor. Hot tea flowed beneath the door. The guard entered, cursing. Thomas drove the silver tray into his face. Eleanor caught the man before his head struck the stone, removed his keys, and dragged him inside. Thomas exchanged his servant's coat for the guard's jacket. You learned that in a birthing room? He asked. I learned that frightened people survive by acting before powerful men finish speaking. They entered the eastern passage. 4 turns brought them to a narrow stairway descending beneath the kitchens. A strip of blue thread had been tied around the railing. Eleanor recognized the exact shade used on Clara's original bracelet. At the bottom, they found a locked pantry. Thomas raised the stolen keys, but Eleanor stopped him. A faint line of black powder marked the keyhole. Mercer expects someone to unlock it. She pressed her ear to the door. Mrs. Whitcomb. 3 taps answered. Eleanor removed a hairpin and slid it through the ventilation gap. Something metallic moved on the other side. The bolt lifted. Mrs. Whitcomb stood inside, with blood on her forehead and the original iron box chained to her wrist. Beside her lay the unconscious boy who had worn Edmund's coat. He is breathing, she said. Mercer drugged him and forced me to make the exchange look convincing. Where is Edmund? Taken through the river tunnel. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then Mercer told me the truth about the barge. Mrs. Whitcomb looked at him. Who are you? No one, apparently. Eleanor gave her the charred birth entry. The midwife read it and touched Thomas's injured wrist. That scar was made years after infancy. The edges are too straight. Thomas looked away. Can the original box prove Edmund's identity? Eleanor asked. It can prove who he is not. His bracelet, blood record, and Beatrice's letter are inside. But Mercer removed 1 page before I escaped. Which page? The one naming Edmund's birth mother. Thomas laughed without humour. My uncle always keeps the final lie for himself. Eleanor opened the box under Mrs. Whitcomb's supervision. The 3 bracelets remained inside, along with a second sealed letter. This time she read it. The letter came from Beatrice. It admitted her affair with the elder doctor, Mercer, and described the bargain she made after her infant died. She would present another child as her own, and the physician would ensure that Julian's future children could be challenged whenever necessary. Beatrice had not known which infant she received. She had cared only that possessing a son would preserve her influence over Ashford. Eleanor folded the letter. This proves conspiracy. But not Clara's father, Mrs. Whitcomb said. Julian is her father. I know. Your mother knew. Yet the medical record proving it was on the missing page. Thomas moved toward the river tunnel. We are wasting time. Eleanor chained the box to her own wrist. No, we are preserving the only evidence that can protect both children. If we carry that through the tunnel, Mercer's men will see it. Then they must believe it remains here. She placed stones inside a flower chest until its weight matched the box. Mrs. Whitcomb wrapped it in her dark shawl and chained it to the unconscious decoy boy. Any observer would assume the evidence remained with them. Eleanor, Thomas, and Mrs. Whitcomb entered the tunnel. The passage emerged beneath an abandoned warehouse near the royal docks. The clock above Westminster showed 27 minutes before midnight. Rain blurred the river lamps. 3 barges waited along the quay, but only one displayed no shipping flag. Eleanor studied their loading lines. "My father inspected merchant berths aboard ships," Mrs. Whitcomb whispered. "A vessel without a flag can depart unnoticed if its cargo is registered under another barge." Thomas pointed toward the largest vessel. "That one belongs to Mercer." "No," Eleanor said. "He wants us to see it." She noticed a small boat sitting low in the water near the far pier. Its crew had loaded no visible cargo, yet the stern nearly touched the river. A hidden compartment. They approached behind a row of stacked barrels. Edmund's voice came from beneath the deck. "Clara?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly in relief. Thomas reached for the knife at his belt. "If I take the captain, can you free the boy? We do this without risking Edmund. He is not even the heir. He is a child." Thomas stared at her. No one had ever protected him simply because he was a child. Eleanor saw that truth settle painfully in his face. He nodded. Mrs. Whitcomb walked openly onto the pier, calling for help as though injured. 2 crewmen left the boat. Thomas drew them between the barrels and disabled them one at a time. Eleanor slipped aboard. She found Edmund chained inside the hidden compartment. A sealed bottle rested beside him, connected to a thin cord running toward the hatch. If the hatch opened fully, the bottle would fall and shatter. Eleanor recognized the almond odor leaking around its cork. "Do not move," she whispered. Edmund's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would come." She held the bottle steady while cutting the cord with her mother's small scissors. Then she freed his ankle and lifted him toward the deck. A hand closed around her wrist. Dr. Mercer stood above the hatch. "You inherited your mother's persistence," he said. "She also mistook it for power." He pulled Eleanor onto the deck. On the pier behind him, Beatrice held a pistol against Clara's head. Julian stood several feet away, unarmed, his injured shoulder soaked with blood. Mercer looked at the iron chain disappearing beneath Eleanor's sleeve. "You brought me the original box," he said. Eleanor drew Clara's ribbon from her pocket. "No," she replied. "I brought you the one number you were never able to change." Mercer's smile vanished. From the warehouse roof, the parliamentary clock began striking midnight. The first stroke of midnight rolled across the river. Beatrice pressed the pistol harder against Clara's temple. "Give Mercer the box." Eleanor stepped away from the open hatch, keeping herself between the physician and Edmund. "How did you bring Clara here?" Beatrice smiled. "Your husband led us to her." Julian's face tightened. After discovering Eleanor's escape, he had searched the parliamentary passages alone. A false message written in Eleanor's name directed him to a carriage near the river. Clara was supposedly waiting inside. Instead, Mercer's men had taken him at gunpoint and used his presence to persuade the Crown Guards that Clara was being transferred under her father's authority. One more consequence of Julian's public power. One more door Mercer could not have opened without him. "I should have gone to Lord Harrow," Julian said. "I believed I could correct everything myself." "You still believed your title made you the solution," Eleanor replied. "I was wrong." The second bell sounded. Mercer extended his hand. "The box." Eleanor unfastened the chain from her wrist and held the iron case over the river. "If Clara is harmed, the records disappear. If the records disappear, no one can prove her legitimacy. I do not need a title badly enough to purchase it with my daughter's life." Clara's mouth trembled, but she stood very still. Beatrice looked toward Julian. "Tell her to surrender it. I have already ordered my wife to sacrifice enough." He removed the Ashford chain of office from beneath his torn coat and dropped it on the wet stones. "Release Clara, and I will confess before the House of Lords that I allowed you to control estate appointments, remove witnesses, and use my seal without inspection. I will surrender the royal office our family has held for 4 generations." Beatrice stared at the chain. "You would destroy Ashford for a girl you denied an hour ago?" "No, I destroyed Ashford when I chose ambition over the truth. This is merely the cost." His confession would end his political career and expose his negligence, even if Mercer escaped. Yet, it offered him no assurance that Eleanor would ever forgive him. Beatrice's pistol wavered. Clara drove her heel down on Beatrice's foot and twisted away. Julian rushed forward. The pistol fired. The shot struck the wooden post beside Clara. Julian pulled his daughter behind him while Thomas emerged from between the barrels and seized Beatrice's weapon. At the same instant, Mercer lunged for Eleanor. She threw the iron box toward Mrs. Whitcomb on the pier. Mercer caught the chain before the midwife could reach it. He dragged the box back, tore the key from Eleanor's hand, and opened the lid. His triumph lasted only a second. The box contained stones. Thomas's face changed. The evidence is still in Parliament. Mercer struck him across the mouth. You led them to the pantry. You said Edmund would die. He is replaceable. The boy in the hatch heard him. Edmund's expression emptied. Mercer pulled a burning taper from the boat's lantern and threw it through the open hatch. Flames spread across the oil-soaked boards. "Edmund!" Eleanor screamed. She dropped to her knees and reached into the compartment, but smoke engulfed the opening. Thomas shoved Mercer aside and climbed down. A moment later, he lifted Edmund through the hatch before hauling himself onto the deck. Julian carried both boys onto the pier as the fire raced toward the mooring ropes. Mercer jumped onto the neighbouring barge. Beatrice tore free from Mrs. Whitcomb and followed him. The burning vessel broke from the quay, drifting between Eleanor and the escaping barge. By the time the flames were controlled, Mercer and Beatrice had vanished into the darkness. They returned to Parliament shortly before dawn. The pantry door hung open. The false evidence chest had been destroyed. The unconscious decoy boy was gone, and the original iron box had disappeared. Only its severed chain remained on the floor. Thomas stared at the empty flower chest. My uncle knew. He suspected, Eleanor said. That is why he forced us to reveal where we had left it. Mrs. Whitcomb searched the pantry shelves, but the birth register, bracelets, and Beatrice's signed letter were gone. Without them, Eleanor could not prove the conspiracy. Worse, Mercer had sent copies of Eleanor's supposed confession to every London newspaper. By sunrise, crowds had gathered outside Parliament demanding the arrest of the adulterous duchess who had abducted 2 heirs and burned the evidence. Mercer had won the public story. Lord Harrow regained enough strength to convene one final hearing at noon. If Eleanor could not authenticate Clara's birth, the child would remain under Crown custody, while Eleanor faced trial. Julian offered to testify that Clara was his daughter. The physician's statement says you could not have fathered her, Lord Harrow warned. It was forged. The only surviving evidence of forgery burned in the chamber. My word must count for something. Eleanor looked at him. It counted against Clara yesterday. Parliament will say you changed it to save your wife. Julian closed his eyes. For once, his name could not repair the damage his name had caused. Clara sat beside Edmund near the cold fireplace. She still wore the christening ribbon around her wrist. Eleanor knelt to examine it. The altered number remained 74. Beneath the replacement stitches were tiny holes from the original number 71. Something troubled her. Mercer had changed the ribbon to make Clara appear connected to the dead male infant, but when he placed Edmund on the barge, he had used the number 74 to mark the teacup. Why would the same number identify both children? Unless 74 had never belonged to either of them. Eleanor remembered the register page. The male infant had been born 23 minutes after Clara, in another room. His mother's name was blotted out, but Beatrice's child had not arrived until hours later. The second infant was someone else's son. She turned to Mrs. Whitcomb, who occupied the blue birthing room. The midwife went pale. The late Duchess, Julian's mother, had supposedly suffered a fever that night. No one had ever said she was pregnant. Eleanor understood the final layer. The boy recorded as dead was Julian's brother. Mrs. Whitcomb nodded slowly. He lived for less than an hour. And Mercer used his number because a dead legitimate son could be transformed into any child he chose. The bracelet scars were distractions. The decisive proof was not on the children. It was on Mercer. To alter the birth entries, he needed knowledge that only someone inside the sealed blue room could possess. Eleanor rose. We cannot recover the box before noon. Then Clara is lost, Julian said. No. She looked at the parliamentary clock, then at the ribbon. Mercer believes every record of the second infant has been destroyed. At the hearing, I will describe one item that never existed. Thomas understood first, and if he corrects you, he proves he was present at a secret royal birth no outsider was permitted to witness. Eleanor wound the ribbon around her palm. Mercer built his entire scheme by forcing frightened people to accept his version of the truth. At noon, I will give him one final lie. Outside, the crowd began chanting for her arrest. Eleanor walked toward the chamber doors. and his own arrogance will force him to correct it. At noon, every bench in the parliamentary chamber was occupied. Members of the House of Lords stood along the walls. Newspaper writers crowded the visitors' gallery, their pens poised above fresh paper. Beyond the closed doors, the crowd continued chanting for Eleanor's arrest. Clara and Edmund sat beneath the protection of 4 royal guards, chosen personally by Lord Harrow. Thomas remained hidden in the adjoining records room. His face had appeared on no official document, and Eleanor intended to preserve that advantage until Mercer could no longer change his story. Julian entered without his ducal chain. He wore a plain black coat over his bandaged shoulder and took a seat behind Eleanor rather than beside the Ashford representatives. Lady Beatrice occupied the place where the Duchess normally sat. It was a deliberate humiliation. Eleanor allowed it. The seat did not matter. The truth did. Lord Harrow called the hearing to order. Beatrice attacked first. "My brother's wife has deceived this family for 8 years," she announced. "When her adultery was exposed, she abducted 2 children, assaulted parliamentary officers, and destroyed the records she claimed would prove her innocence." She placed 3 objects on the table: the melted remains of an iron lock, a burned piece of blue ribbon, and a physician's report bearing the Ashford seal. Dr. Mercer stepped forward. "The Duchess suffers from a fixation created by guilt," he said. "She believes ordinary birth numbers conceal a conspiracy. Last night, she threatened to kill both children, rather than surrender them to lawful guardians." Clara rose. "That is a lie." Eleanor turned gently. "Sit down, darling. He wants you to become angry." Clara obeyed, though her hands remained clenched. Mercer displayed the burned ribbon. This was recovered near the parliamentary fire. It bears the number 71, which the Duchess falsely claims belonged to her daughter. Several members leaned forward. The ribbon was a clever forgery. If Eleanor rejected it, Mercer would say she denied her own evidence. If she accepted it, he would connect her to the destruction of the false box. Eleanor did neither. "My daughter's ribbon is around her wrist." Clara lifted her hand. A murmur swept through the chamber. Mercer's gaze sharpened. He had not known Clara still possessed it. Lord Harrow ordered both ribbons placed side by side. The burned one bore smooth, machine-made stitches. Clara's ribbon had been sewn by hand. Eleanor addressed the parliamentary clerk. "Record that Dr. Mercer presented a false object as evidence." "It may be a copy," Beatrice interrupted. "Then he should have called it a copy." Mercer recovered quickly. "The distinction changes nothing. The Duchess cannot prove which number originally belonged to Clara." "No," Eleanor said, "but I can prove you altered the records." She told the chamber about the 3 births. Clara, at 11 minutes past midnight, an unnamed male infant 23 minutes later, and Beatrice's son shortly before dawn. Beatrice laughed. "The original register has conveniently vanished. Your letter was inside the box, a letter no one can produce." Mrs. Whitcomb rose from the witness bench. "I read it." Beatrice turned on her. "A woman reported dead for 8 years is hardly a reliable witness." "Then let us rely on Dr. Mercer," Eleanor said. The physician smiled. "I will gladly answer any relevant medical question." Eleanor approached the table. The second infant was born in the blue birthing room to the late Duchess of Ashford. He was Julian's legitimate younger brother. Julian's face remained still. Eleanor had revealed the plan to him only moments before the hearing. "The infant survived 47 minutes, she continued. "Before his death, the midwife tied a white cord around his right ankle and pressed his left footprint into the register using blue ink." Mercer gave a quiet, contemptuous laugh. No physician would mark an Ashford infant with blue ink. The room contained only red sealing pigment, and the cord was tied around the left ankle because the child's right foot was malformed. Silence fell. Mercer's smile vanished. Eleanor did not move. Lord Harrow leaned forward. "You speak with remarkable certainty, Doctor." Mercer looked toward Beatrice. She had gone white. "I am describing standard medical practice." "No," Mrs. Whitcomb said. "The infant's malformed foot was concealed at the late Duke's command. Only 5 people entered that room. She named them one by one: the late Duke, his wife, Eleanor's mother, Mrs. Whitcomb, and the elder doctor, Edmund Mercer. Silas Mercer had not yet served the Ashford family. Officially, he had been studying medicine in Edinburgh. Eleanor Let the contradictions settle across the chamber. You knew the color of the pigment, the position of the cord, and the child's deformity because your father told you, she said. He helped hide the birth, and you used his knowledge to rebuild the record years later. Mercer's hands curled against the table. That proves only that my father spoke to me. It proves your family possessed secret details necessary to forge the birth entries. It does not prove I altered Clara's ribbon. No, your own evidence proves that. Eleanor pointed to the burned ribbon Mercer had submitted. My mother never attached numbers with ordinary silk. She used thread soaked in alum so it would resist blood and washing. When exposed to intense heat, it stiffens but does not disappear. Lord Harrow examined the burned ribbon. Its blue number had melted into the cloth. The forgery had been sewn with common dyed silk. A parliamentary clerk recorded the result. For the first time, newspaper writers began crossing out Mercer's accusations. Beatrice rose. This is a performance built on scraps of thread. It still does not prove Clara is Julian's daughter. You are correct, Eleanor said. So let us discuss the physician's report. Mercer had claimed Julian was incapable of fathering Clara because of a riding injury. Eleanor asked him to state the date of the accident. The 6th of October, Mercer replied. And Clara was conceived in November? According to the duchess's own account. Then your conclusion appears reasonable. Mercer relaxed slightly. Julian stood. The accident did not occur in October. Mercer turned toward him. My medical notes were forged. The hunt was postponed because the king travelled through Ashford that month. I fell from the horse on the 6th of December after Clara had already been conceived. Lord Harrow requested the royal travel record. A clerk produced it from Parliament's own archive. The king had indeed stayed at Ashford during the first week of October. No hunt could have taken place. Mercer's statement collapsed. Julian faced the chamber. I knew the date was wrong when I signed it. Eleanor looked at him. This was the costly truth he had promised. I had been injured in December, he continued, but I accepted October because it allowed me to doubt my daughter without admitting that I was displacing her for political advantage. Dr. Mercer deceived me. I chose to assist that deception. No, the confession stripped away his final defense. Beatrice moved toward the side door. 2 royal guards blocked her. Eleanor placed the charred fragment from Ashford House on the table. Only the name Edmund Mercer remained legible. Dr. Edmund Mercer was not the infant, she said. He was the father of the child, now called Edmund. The boy stared at Mercer. You are my brother. Mercer said nothing. And Thomas? Eleanor asked. The young man you scarred and sent into Ashford House. Beatrice gripped the edge of the table. Thomas entered from the records room. Gasps broke across the chamber as he removed the bandage from his wrist and displayed the deliberately carved scar. Mercer looked toward the gallery, calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Thomas placed the authentic charred birth entry beside the forged ribbon. I am not Beatrice's son, he said. Her baby died 12 minutes after birth. Mercer selected me from an orphan house and taught me to claim the Ashford name. That man is a criminal, Mercer said. He threatened the Duchess. I did, Thomas replied. At your command. Lord Harrow ordered Mercer arrested. The physician raised both hands. You possess no original register, no bracelets, and no signed confession. You have suspicion, damaged paper, and the testimony of people desperate to save themselves. He was right. They had exposed his access and destroyed his medical lie, but the decisive records were still missing. Then Clara touched Eleanor's sleeve. Mama, the box made a rattling sound even after the bracelets were removed. Eleanor remembered the brass plate that had fallen from its base during the fire. A hidden compartment beneath a hidden compartment. Mercer heard the child and moved toward her. The royal guards seized him. Eleanor looked at the melted lock Beatrice had presented as evidence. Its base was unusually thick. The original box had never disappeared. Beatrice and Mercer had stripped away its outer walls, burned its visible contents, and brought its reinforced base into the chamber because they believed it was empty. Eleanor placed her hand over the metal. Beneath the soot, she felt the outline of a tiny broken-winged swallow. Lord Harrow summoned a royal locksmith. As he inserted a narrow tool into the concealed catch, Mercer began fighting the guards. No one can authenticate what is inside, he shouted. Mrs. Whitcomb stepped forward. I can. The hidden panel clicked open. Inside lay one folded page protected between two sheets of silver. Eleanor recognized her mother's handwriting. At the bottom were 5 signatures, including one belonging to the man who had spent 8 years pretending he had never entered the blue birthing room. Dr. Silas Mercer. Eleanor lifted the page, but did not yet unfold it. "Before I read this," she said, "the doctor must answer one final question." Mercer stopped struggling. Eleanor looked directly at him. "If Clara was not born to the Duke and me, why does your own signature appear beneath the record of her first breath?" At noon, every bench in the parliamentary chamber was occupied. Members of the House of Lords stood along the walls. Newspaper writers crowded the visitors' gallery, their pens poised above fresh paper. Beyond the closed doors, the crowd continued chanting for Eleanor's arrest. Clara and Edmund sat beneath the protection of 4 royal guards, chosen personally by Lord Harrow. Thomas remained hidden in the adjoining records room. His face had appeared on no official document, and Eleanor intended to preserve that advantage until Mercer could no longer change his story. Julian entered without his ducal chain. He wore a plain black coat over his bandaged shoulder and took a seat behind Eleanor rather than beside the Ashford representatives. Lady Beatrice occupied the place where the Duchess normally sat. It was a deliberate humiliation. Eleanor allowed it. The seat did not matter. The truth did. Lord Harrow called the hearing to order. Beatrice attacked first. "My brother's wife has deceived this family for 8 years, she announced. When her adultery was exposed, she abducted 2 children, assaulted parliamentary officers, and destroyed the records she claimed would prove her innocence. She placed 3 objects on the table: the melted remains of an iron lock, a burned piece of blue ribbon, and a physician's report bearing the Ashford seal." Dr. Mercer stepped forward. "The Duchess suffers from a fixation created by guilt," he said. "She believes ordinary birth numbers conceal a conspiracy. Last night, she threatened to kill both children rather than surrender them to lawful guardians." Clara rose. "That is a lie." Eleanor turned gently. "Sit down, darling. He wants you to become angry." Clara obeyed, though her hands remained clenched. Mercer displayed the burned ribbon. This was recovered near the parliamentary fire. It bears the number 71, which the Duchess falsely claims belonged to her daughter. Several members leaned forward. The ribbon was a clever forgery. If Eleanor rejected it, Mercer would say she denied her own evidence. If she accepted it, he would connect her to the destruction of the false box. Eleanor did neither. "My daughter's ribbon is around her wrist." Clara lifted her hand. A murmur swept through the chamber. Mercer's gaze sharpened. He had not known Clara still possessed it. Lord Harrow ordered both ribbons placed side by side. The burned one bore smooth, machine-made stitches. Clara's ribbon had been sewn by hand. Eleanor addressed the parliamentary clerk. "Record that Dr. Mercer presented a false object as evidence." "It may be a copy," Beatrice interrupted. "Then he should have called it a copy." Mercer recovered quickly. "The distinction changes nothing. The Duchess cannot prove which number originally belonged to Clara." "No," Eleanor said, "but I can prove you altered the records." She told the chamber about the 3 births. Clara, at 11 minutes past midnight, an unnamed male infant, 23 minutes later, and Beatrice's son, shortly before dawn. Beatrice laughed. "The original register has conveniently vanished. Your letter was inside the box." "A letter no one can produce." Mrs. Whitcomb rose from the witness bench. "I read it." Beatrice turned on her. "A woman reported dead for 8 years is hardly a reliable witness." "Then let us rely on Dr. Mercer," Eleanor said. The physician smiled. "I will gladly answer any relevant medical question." Eleanor approached the table. The second infant was born in the blue birthing room to the late Duchess of Ashford. He was Julian's legitimate younger brother. Julian's face remained still. Eleanor had revealed the plan to him only moments before the hearing. "The infant survived 47 minutes, she continued. "Before his death, the midwife tied a white cord around his right ankle and pressed his left footprint into the register using blue ink." Mercer gave a quiet, contemptuous laugh. "No physician would mark an Ashford infant with blue ink. The room contained only red sealing pigment, and the cord was tied around the left ankle because the child's right foot was malformed." Silence fell. Mercer's smile vanished. Eleanor did not move. Lord Harrow leaned forward. "You speak with remarkable certainty, Doctor." Mercer looked toward Beatrice. She had gone white. "I am describing standard medical practice." "No," Mrs. Whitcomb said. "The infant's malformed foot was concealed at the late Duke's command. Only 5 people entered that room." She named them one by one: the late Duke, his wife, Eleanor's mother, Mrs. Whitcomb, and the elder Dr. Edmund Mercer. Silas Mercer had not yet served the Ashford family. Officially, he had been studying medicine in Edinburgh. Eleanor let the contradiction settle across the chamber. "You knew the colour of the pigment, the position of the cord, and the child's deformity because your father told you," she said. "He helped hide the birth, and you used his knowledge to rebuild the record years later." Mercer's hands curled against the table. "That proves only that my father spoke to me. It proves your family possessed secret details necessary to forge the birth entries. It does not prove I altered Clara's ribbon. No, your own evidence proves that." Eleanor pointed to the burned ribbon Mercer had submitted. "My mother never attached numbers with ordinary silk. She used thread, soaked in alum, so it would resist blood and washing. When exposed to intense heat, it stiffens, but does not disappear." Lord Harrow examined the burned ribbon. Its blue number had melted into the cloth. The forgery had been sewn with common dyed silk. A parliamentary clerk recorded the result. For the first time, newspaper writers began crossing out Mercer's accusations. Beatrice rose. "This is a performance built on scraps of thread. It still does not prove Clara is Julian's daughter." "You are correct," Eleanor said. "So let us discuss the physician's report." Mercer had claimed Julian was incapable of fathering Clara because of a riding injury. Eleanor asked him to state the date of the accident. "The 6th of October, Mercer replied. "And Clara was conceived in November?" "According to the Duchess's own account." "Then your conclusion appears reasonable." Mercer relaxed slightly. Julian stood. "The accident did not occur in October." Mercer turned toward him. "My medical notes were forged. The hunt was postponed because the king travelled through Ashford that month. I fell from the horse on the 6th of December, after Clara had already been conceived." Lord Harrow requested the royal travel record. A clerk produced it from Parliament's own archive. The king had indeed stayed at Ashford during the first week of October. No hunt could have taken place. Mercer's statement collapsed. Julian faced the chamber. "I knew the date was wrong when I signed it." Eleanor looked at him. This was the costly truth he had promised. "I had been injured in December," he continued, "but I accepted October because it allowed me to doubt my daughter without admitting that I was displacing her for political advantage. Dr. Mercer deceived me. I chose to assist that deception." "I know." The confession stripped away his final defense. Beatrice moved toward the side door. 2 royal guards blocked her. Eleanor placed the charred fragment from Ashford House on the table. Only the name Edmund Mercer remained legible. "Dr. Edmund Mercer was not the infant," she said. "He was the father of the child, now called Edmund." The boy stared at Mercer. "You are my brother." Mercer said nothing. "And Thomas?" Eleanor asked. "The young man you scarred and sent into Ashford House." Beatrice gripped the edge of the table. Thomas entered from the records room. Gasps broke across the chamber as he removed the bandage from his wrist and displayed the deliberately carved scar. Mercer looked toward the gallery, calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Thomas placed the authentic, charred birth entry beside the forged ribbon. "I am not Beatrice's son," he said. "Her baby died 12 minutes after birth. Mercer selected me from an orphan house and taught me to claim the Ashford name." "That man is a criminal," Mercer said. "He threatened the Duchess." "I did," Thomas replied, "at your command." Lord Harrow ordered Mercer arrested. The physician raised both hands. "You possess no original register, no bracelets, and no signed confession. You have suspicion, damaged paper, and the testimony of people desperate to save themselves." He was right. They had exposed his access and destroyed his medical lie, but the decisive records were still missing. Then Clara touched Eleanor's sleeve. "Mama." The box made a rattling sound, even after the bracelets were removed. Eleanor remembered the brass plate that had fallen from its base during the fire. A hidden compartment beneath a hidden compartment. Mercer heard the child and moved toward her. The royal guard seized him. Eleanor looked at the melted lock Beatrice had presented as evidence. Its base was unusually thick. The original box had never disappeared. Beatrice and Mercer had stripped away its outer walls. burned its visible contents, and brought its reinforced base into the chamber because they believed it was empty. Eleanor placed her hand over the metal. Beneath the soot, she felt the outline of a tiny, broken-wing swallow. Lord Harrow summoned a royal locksmith. As he inserted a narrow tool into the concealed catch, Mercer began fighting the guards. "No one can authenticate what is inside," he shouted. Mrs. Whitcomb stepped forward. "I can." The hidden panel clicked open. Inside lay one folded page, protected between two sheets of silver. Eleanor recognized her mother's handwriting. At the bottom were 5 signatures, including one belonging to the man who had spent 8 years pretending he had never entered the blue birthing room, Dr. Silas Mercer. Eleanor lifted the page, but did not yet unfold it. "Before I read this," she said, "the doctor must answer one final question." Mercer stopped struggling. Eleanor looked directly at him. "If Clara was not born to the Duke and me, why does your own signature appear beneath the record of her first breath?" Eleanor unfolded the silver-protected page. The first line recorded Clara's birth at 11 minutes past midnight. Beneath it appeared her mother's signature, Mrs. Whitcomb's mark, and the signatures of 2 household witnesses. The 5th belonged to Silas Mercer. Mercer's face lost all colour. "You were not studying in Edinburgh," Eleanor said. "You entered the birthing room under your father's name because he had fallen ill. You examined Clara yourself." "You note," Lord Harrow read the final paragraph aloud, "the infant bears the blood mark shared by the Duke of Ashford and his paternal line. Paternity confirmed beyond medical dispute. Clara's legitimacy had never been uncertain. Mercer had signed the proof." Beatrice stepped away from him. "You told me that page had been destroyed." "I told you to remain silent," he hissed. The entire chamber heard him. Eleanor placed Clara's christening ribbon beside the record. "My mother discovered that Mercer had copied the confidential birth ledger. Before she could report him, he attacked her and removed the visible pages. Mrs. Whitcomb was hidden for 8 years because she had witnessed his substitution of the bracelets." Lord Harrow turned toward Beatrice. "And your part?" Thomas answered before she could. "She gave Mercer access to Ashford House. She supplied the family seal and persuaded the Duke to appoint Mercer's men as household officers." Beatrice looked at Julian. "You wanted a male heir. You complained that Eleanor had filled the nursery with women who answered to her. I merely gave you an alternative." "Ah," Julian rose. "No, you offered me a lie, but I chose it." The admission silenced her. He faced the chamber rather than Eleanor. "I dismissed the woman who had protected my daughter's records. I permitted my sister to replace loyal servants. When my wife asked me to examine Clara's ribbon, I refused. I signed a declaration denying my own child, although I knew the date in Mercer's report was false." He placed both hands on the parliamentary table. "Every door these conspirators entered was opened by my authority." Mercer suddenly tore free of one guard and seized the folded record. He thrust it toward a candle. Eleanor caught his wrist. He was stronger, but she did not attempt to pull the page away. Instead, she struck the inside of his elbow with the iron key still attached to her broken chain. His hand opened. Mrs. Whitcomb caught the record before it reached the flame. The guards forced Mercer to the floor. Beatrice made one final attempt to escape through the visitors' gallery. Thomas blocked the steps. She stared at the scar she had once accepted as proof that he was her lost son. "You deceived me." Thomas's expression did not change. "You never asked who I was. You asked only whether I could make you powerful." He stepped aside for the royal officers. Lord Harrow ordered Mercer charged with attempted murder, abduction, forgery, destruction of parliamentary evidence, and conspiracy against the Ashford succession. His medical license was revoked before sunset, and the Crown seized the property he had purchased through false appointments. Beatrice was arrested for conspiracy, unlawful confinement, and assisting the abduction of 2 children. Her claim to temporary control of Ashford was struck from the record. Thomas surrendered voluntarily. His threats and attacks could not be excused, but his testimony and rescue of Edmund were entered in mitigation. He asked for no name, inheritance, or protection, only that Mercer never be permitted to control another orphan. Edmund was not an Ashford heir. He was also not returned to an institution. At Eleanor's request, Parliament placed him under Mrs. Whitcomb's temporary guardianship until an independent trust could be established. The other orphan, used as his decoy, was found alive at a riverside lodging and received the same protection. Then Lord Harrow addressed Clara. The parliamentary record will state that Lady Clara Ashford is the lawful daughter of Julian, Duke of Ashford, and Eleanor, Duchess of Ashford. Every declaration questioning her birth is annulled. Clara looked at Julian. Does that mean he cannot deny me again? Julian's face tightened. It means no one can, Eleanor answered. Julian removed the ducal signet from his hand. My daughter should never need Parliament to protect her from her father. He placed the ring before Clara, but did not ask her to take it. I denied you because keeping power mattered more to me than deserving your trust. I cannot undo that. I can only make certain my lie never controls your future. Before the chamber adjourned, he surrendered his royal office and requested the appointment of outside trustees to oversee Clara's inheritance. He restored Eleanor's authority over the household accounts and transferred every unentailed property purchased with her marriage settlement into an independent trust beyond his control. He also signed an agreement granting her a separate residence, unrestricted custody of Clara, and an annual income that could not be withdrawn as punishment. It was not forgiveness. It was restitution. 3 months later, Eleanor reopened her mother's rooms as a training house for midwives and a protected archive for disputed birth records. No duke possessed its keys. Every sealed box required the signatures of 2 women and 1 independent clerk before it could be moved. Mrs. Whitcomb directed the training rooms, while Edmund and the rescued orphan began lessons in the school attached to the house. Thomas wrote once from custody. His letter contained no plea for release. He asked Eleanor to record the true names of the boys Mercer had taken from orphanages. She did. Julian lived in the western wing of Ashford House, but did not enter Eleanor's residence without invitation. He testified at every proceeding against Mercer and Beatrice, even when doing so exposed another failure of his judgment. Once each week, he sent Clara a letter. For 6 weeks, she left them unopened. On the 7th, she read one. Eleanor neither encouraged nor prevented her. Near winter, Julian arrived at the training house carrying the repaired iron box. He stopped at the threshold. "The Crown has returned it to you," he said. "I thought you should decide where it belongs. You could have sent a servant." "I could have, but there is something I must say without witnesses to reward me for saying it." Eleanor waited. "I accused you because the truth threatened the future I wanted. I denied Clara because I believed my name mattered more than her safety, and when you warned me, I treated your knowledge as defiance." His voice remained steady, though his hands did not. "I am not asking you to return." "Good," Eleanor said. "Because I am not ready." He lowered his head. "I understand. If that changes, it will not be because you surrendered one office or made one speech. It will be because Clara learns that your love does not disappear when believing her becomes inconvenient." Julian looked toward the classroom where Clara sat beside Edmund. "And you?" "I must learn whether I can stand beside you without surrendering the woman I became after you cast me away." He accepted the boundary without bargaining. Eleanor took the iron box from him. Months earlier, Julian had stood before Parliament and used a document to take his daughter's name from her. Now he waited outside a doorway he no longer had the right to cross. Clara appeared behind Eleanor. She held one of Julian's letters in her hand. "You may come in," she said, "but only until the lesson begins." Julian looked at Eleanor for permission. That difference mattered. Eleanor stepped aside, not as a wife returning to her old place, but as the woman who now determined who entered the life she had built. Julian crossed the threshold without his signet, his title, or any promise of forgiveness. Behind them, Eleanor locked the authenticated birth record inside the iron box. Then she placed the only key around her own neck.